All right, everyone, warm up those brains. It's time for the Get More Smarter podcast. This is episode 226. I'm Jason Bane.
I'm Ian Silverii. This week on the Get More Smarter podcast, holy shit, did we pick a weird time to have a baby? Sam Silverii is 3 weeks old, which is 5 days younger than the Trump administration, and even he knows what's going on in D.C. is bonkers. Then, we check in with our 8th favorite, soon-to-be one-term member of Congress, yes, he's tied for 8th, who has spent his time in Washington hiding when he's not too busy doing Musk and Trump's bidding. And we check in on the Colorado Legislature, where State House Republicans literally show their asses in defense of the January 6th rioters, who Donald Trump just pardoned for some indefensible reason.
But first, I sat down with House Assistant Democratic Leader, Colorado's own Joe Neguse, to ask him what Democrats in Congress can and will do to stop Trump and Elon Musk's wrecking ball, and what you, yes you, can do to help. Take a listen. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Assistant Minority Leader in the House and the new Doge Destroyer, Colorado's own Congressman Joe Neguse. Welcome back to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Well, good to be with you, Jason. Always enjoy coming by and looking forward to the conversation.
Let's start out by the big news. You've been selected by Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to head up a new litigation and rapid response task force to push back on the damage being inflicted in this country by the Trump administration. This is so new, you don't even have a catchy name yet, right?
That's true. It's a long title in terms of the group, in terms of the task force.
Tell us what this was created for and what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, essentially, just by way of background, Leader Jeffries, as you mentioned, about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, sent out a dear colleague to our caucus announcing the creation of this task force. And the real purpose behind the task force is to be a clearinghouse for House Democrats' substantive responses to the unlawful and unconstitutional executive orders that have been issued by the administration and the unlawful agency actions, which,
right,
as you referenced, are causing some real harm across our country and certainly in Colorado. It's an all-hands-on-deck moment, as Leader Jeffries has articulated, and so the purpose behind this particular group is to kind of leverage the talents and the expertise of a lot of members of the House Democratic Caucus, many of whom are attorneys, former prosecutors, to ensure that we're developing a comprehensive response, right? So that response includes legislation. We've introduced a number of bills, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that would respond specifically to some of the agency actions and the executive orders that the Trump administration has issued. There are oversight tools that are available to us, at our disposal, notwithstanding that we are, as you know, in the minority in the House, although the minority, the Republicans, have the smallest majority since the Great Depression. So
right,
it's a rapidly shrinking majority. But in any event, there are oversight tools, investigative tools that are available to members. And so we're kind of a clearinghouse for strategically thinking about how to deploy those. And then in terms of litigation, and as you know, there have been, I think, over 75 cases now pending in federal courts across the country.
I didn't know it was
states.
that many. 75. Wow.
75 cases, different cases in 10 different states, I think 9 or 10 different judicial districts. And as you know, the Trump administration has largely failed in its, work to defend the propriety of their actions. Federal courts across the country have ruled that these executive orders and agency actions are unconstitutional. So House Democrats have a role to play in terms of both educating the public about these lawsuits and as they move through the federal courts, and then also speaking, with one voice in terms of defending the constitutional prerogatives of the House on behalf of the American people. So without getting too much into detail on that latter point, because obviously not wanting to telegraph legal strategies in advance,
Sure,
but having a lot of conversations internally about where appropriate, House Democrats speaking on that front. So that's really in a nutshell what the group is doing. We've got a number of subgroups that are working really hard, of members, some of whom I mentioned, are former attorneys, and it's all hands on deck. So it's a busy time.
Tell us more about the litigation piece of the working group, because I don't think most people would think of Congress as a place where you can, institute lawsuits, but there are options, right?
Yeah. So again, I don't want to telegraph too much, but before in advance of the strategies, but I will just say As you said, the House has a constitutional function in terms of defending its prerogatives, the Article One branch of government, and has a role to play in terms of potentially being engaged in litigation, and then of course through amicus briefs, right, in different
Okay.
cases in which we can speak with one voice on behalf of the American people. So those are a couple of examples. And then, obviously, working with states, attorneys generals, and the broader public in terms of those cases as they develop. So that's kind of the that facet, that part of the portfolio.
Okay. The Trump administration is operating on this flood the zone strategy to overwhelm people with their actions. We could spend hours talking about everything they're doing, all the way down to things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico. But in your mind, like, what are the things that people need to focus on and not lose sight of?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's a very salient question because I do think, as you said, the Trump administration's flood the zone strategy is an intentional one. I mean, they're doing that so that they can obfuscate away from the really draconian actions that the administration has taken
Right.
that would either harm Americans writ large and I should say, would so disrupt and undermine the constitutional order as to really, endanger, our Republican form of government, right, as a constitutional republic, the checks and balances and the separations of powers. And so, in my view, finding a way, and of course it can be difficult given the volume of actions and nonsensical statements that come from this White House on a day-to-day basis, it can be difficult to kind of ascertain and decipher which actions are the most egregious and would pose the greatest risk, again, either to our constitutional order or in terms of direct harms to the American people. So, in terms of what I think and where I would sort of perhaps point people to, with respect to harm to the American people, I'm sure we're going to talk a bit about this, but the budgetary plans that House Republicans are pursuing right now, as we speak, next week they're likely to put on the floor for a vote a $4.5 trillion plan that would cut taxes for billionaires and corporations and would do it on the backs of hardworking American taxpayers by gutting Medicaid to the tune of $800 billion, food assistance programs, core programs that so many folks in our country and in our great state rely upon. And to me, that has to be center stage in terms of what we talk about
Right.
with respect to their economic plans. The same, I would say, is true of these mass indiscriminate terminations at these federal agencies. I've spent a lot of the last 48 hours working with local law enforcement, local jurisdictional leaders, mayors, county commissioners, in trying to navigate how we respond to the mass terminations at the Forest Service, which could pose a really serious danger, I guess, probably the best way to put it, in terms of the upcoming wildfire season, right? And the work
Sure.
that those forestry techs and so many of them do on a day-to-day basis, really important. Search and rescue, management of our public lands. And of course, Colorado's blessed to have a large proportion of our state as public lands that we hold in trust for the next generation. So to see the administration doing what they're doing in that context, that to me is very egregious. Last thing I would say, in terms of the constitutional order, I think it's very clear that Republicans, it's a sort of far right extremist ideology around the unitary executive theory, is something that they would like to see vindicated by the Supreme Court. And they are pursuing that a variety of different ways, one of which is essentially trying to eviscerate the Article One powers that Congress has in terms of the powers of the purse, right? And the ability for the Congress to appropriate dollars and the president's responsibility under Article 2 to faithfully execute the laws that Congress has passed. They clearly would like to see that check, that balance, that process undermined, and they've tried, right, by the illegal funding freeze, the OMB funding freeze that they tried to initiate that was then blocked in federal court. They are trying to do it by virtue of what they're doing in each of these agencies, attempting to dismantle agencies piece by piece, or threatening to abolish agencies that are created by federal law, created by Congress, and that cannot be eliminated by the executive branch unilaterally. To me, that I very much worry about the constitutional order being undermined by virtue of those actions, and I think ultimately those are going to be issues that come before the Supreme Court and that are resolved.
Do you hear even privately from some House Republicans who are smart enough to realize that if this goes through, their job is sort of much less important? Like,
Yeah.
are you
Yeah.
just going to give away what you're there to do?
Yeah. I mean, this is perhaps the most confounding part of the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks for me, because, obviously, as you know, Republicans very clearly telegraphed during the course of the 2024 campaign how extreme their agenda would be, Project 2025, which they're now implementing. What I don't know that collectively, the American people, and certainly members of Congress perhaps did not anticipate, is just the complete capitulation
Right.
of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, whom, as you said, are in effect not just abdicating their own role and responsibilities, but are enabling the complete undermining of the institution, such that Congress would not function in the way that the framers and the founders intended. And that, I think, is a unique and very different development in terms of where we find ourselves today than even during Trump's first term.
Right.
And of course, kind of the writing has been on the wall over the last 4 years, beginning, of course, with the impeachment process, as you know, 4 years ago that I served as one of the prosecutors in
Hmm.
the second impeachment, and Republicans at that time abdicating their constitutional duty in the Senate, most Republicans doing so. And from there, it's just been this cascade, right, where so many of my colleagues, people whom I had respected and had worked with in the past, just becoming sycophants for this administration and forgetting the roles and the responsibilities and the obligations that they have as a member of the Article One branch, which is a co-equal branch of government. I privately, some of them have begun to express some reservations, but at the end of the day, private reservations,
Yeah.
aren't worth anything if they are unwilling to stand up and do right by their constituents.
Is it just fear of what Trump or Musk might do in terms of like threatening a primary, or is there something else? What do you think is behind this?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think about it a lot. I mean, it's something that I've tried to give some thought to. My sense is, I mean, of course, as you know, we live in a hyper polarized political environment, and for many of my colleagues on their side of the aisle, their lens is sort of myopically focused on their own reelections, right?
Right.
And so, as you said, insofar as they stand out of step with the president, they are likely to immediately elicit a primary challenge and see their careers jettisoned, right? And anyone who doubts that can look no further than, I mentioned the impeachment, but you'll recall 4 years ago, there were 13 Republican members of
Hmm.
Congress who voted to impeach the President of the United States in the House, and then 7 senators in the United States Senate who voted to convict. The vast majority of those individuals are gone. They're no longer serving in the Congress. There are only, I believe, 2 of the House Republicans that voted to impeach. I believe this is the case. You'll have to
Wow.
fact check me, 2 or 3 who are remaining in the House, right? So the vast majority of them defeated in primaries, left out. Liz Cheney, of course, right? Great example.
Right.
Someone, a former conference chair of the Republican caucus, a mere 4 years ago, who lost in her primary after voting to impeach the president. So yeah, I think political consequences are a big part of it. Now, I will say, because I don't want to sound too hopeless here, and don't want to give your viewers and your listeners this sense that all is lost. But the reality is, by that same token, I believe what the Trump administration is doing is deeply unpopular with the American public. You see
Yeah.
this empirical data
We're starting to see
today,
that.
some
Yeah.
Gallup polling, right? I mean, you know this better than most. Like, I think the policies they're pursuing are deeply out of step, and it's clear that the American people are, beginning to let their elected representatives know how they feel about what's happening in Washington D.C. And as that continues, I believe some members, not all, but some folks on the other side of the aisle will begin to modulate, right? And will begin to worry less about the primary challenge and worry more about losing a general election.
Right.
And so, we'll see. But I do think that's a part of this.
Let's break out a couple of these subjects you mentioned earlier. Talk about some of the firings of federal employees. Trump and Prime Minister Elon Musk fired 1,000 national park employees recently. people I think might look at that and say, well, you're cutting budget items, sure, but what is the impact that will have if, say, I want to go visit a national park?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, so there's kind of different levels of impact, right? First and foremost, the impact on these individuals who are civil servants entitled to civil servant protections under
Right.
federal law. These are your neighbors. These are people that we work with. These are,
Mhm.
you're the fellow parents at your daughter. My daughter has her her last basketball game of the season. She's 6 years old tonight, so it's not not ultra competitive basketball, but the parents who were there watching the
Yeah,
game
sure.
with my wife and I have no doubt that some of them are employed by the federal government, and very well some of them will have been implicated in these mass indiscriminate terminations. And so there's the human impact in terms of those individuals, the collateral economic impact in terms of mass layoffs and mass terminations within the federal government. That coupled with a variety of other actions that the administration is pursuing, the tariff policies, the dismantling of different agencies, all of which, in my view, creates the sort of confluence of factors that could very well create a recession. And so that's something that obviously
Yeah.
it would be deeply devastating for Americans. So there's that impact. And then, as you said, from a service perspective, right? I mean, fundamentally, these individuals who work at the Forest Service or NOAA in my district or the FAA or the CDC, they're performing vital services for the
Hmm.
American public. And folks are going to begin, this is already started now, to see day to day and experience day to day the impacts to their lives by virtue of what Doge and Musk and President Trump are pursuing, right? So you talk about the Forest Service, everything from, or the National Park Service, everything from reservation systems now being shut down, right,
Right.
for access to some of the most iconic national parks and campgrounds in the United States of America as people are making their summer, families making their summer vacation plans, to hazardous fuel reduction projects, right? So these are literally projects designed to prevent the next wildfire
Hmm.
from metastasizing, that are now shut down, right? In advance of a looming fire season across Nevada and California and Washington State and here in Colorado.
Hmm.
Real impacts. The individuals who do search and rescue, right, on our federal public lands and trail maintenance, and it runs the gamut. I mean, you could go down the list. These are important functions that the federal government provides, and that the federal, American taxpayer is entitled to, and they are gutting them. And I think the American people ultimately are going to make their voices heard that they don't agree
Right.
with those priorities, and that remains to be seen how fast that happens. So.
There was a big story in January about the Trump administration freezing federal funding for several critical programs,
Mhm.
including Medicare reimbursements. A judge had to tell them they can't do that. It took a while for some of that money to start flowing again. Do we know if it's all been unfrozen?
So there's a lack of clarity. It's a day-to-day, case-by-case basis that we're learning. And just by way of example, I spoke at a project yesterday in Boulder County, an important project regarding the elimination of a coal fire uh, deep underground in Boulder County, not too far from where the Marshall Fire tragically, as you will remember,
Hmm.
occurred a few years ago. And so this project is funded by state dollars, local dollars, but also federal dollars, Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act that I had championed and played a leadership role in getting across the finish line several years ago under the Biden administration. And the federal dollars for this particular project were frozen for a period of time. And literally yesterday, we learned as we were at an event to celebrate this project's milestone that the funds had been unlocked, right? And so we're
Okay.
working with our local mayors, our county commissioners, of course, with Governor Polis, state agencies, to try to identify the places where funds that were supposed to have been unlocked by virtue of the court order or the rescission of the memo that was mentioned, that those funds ultimately are unlocked, that they're encumbered, and that they go to the relevant local agencies. But it's a case by case basis. It's part of this again indiscriminate approach that they're taking. There's
Yeah.
a total lack of clarity. The one thing I will say though, because you mentioned that the federal court intervened, which is true on the OMB funding freeze. So this was essentially, for your viewers, folks who might not be aware, the Trump administration issued an agency directive purporting to shut off, funding on a mass wide
Right.
scale for NGOs, grants, and loans provided to local governments, to hospitals, to academic institutions, you name it. And a federal court ultimately intervened and issued a temporary restraining order, and then other courts followed. But before that happened, the administration pulled that memo back, right? Or purported to at least pull that
Right.
memo back temporarily. And they did that because of the outcry, because so many Americans shared their stories, both publicly and through congressional offices. And so that example is instructive in my view, right? That I think there's a danger of believing that we don't have agency, right? Or the ability to kind of shape events. We clearly do. And part of it is folks raising their voices and sharing their stories about what's happening. Because if we do that, there's a potential for there to be reversals. And we shouldn't assume that these public bodies, including the executive branch, are impervious to public opinion. They're not. And that, to me, that's something to keep in mind.
That's a great point, because it does start to feel helpless after a time. But as you said, they are reacting to
Yeah.
what the public says.
Exactly.
You talked about the budget that the Republicans are putting forth that would cut Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
March 14th is the next deadline to fund the government and avoid a shutdown. Are Democrats, do you think, prepared to take a different approach with the budget or with the shutdown, given that Republicans in the last year or two have needed Democrats to pass anything?
Yeah, so there's couple different things to unpack. One, for the benefit of your viewers, there's kind of parallel paths, right? So on the one hand, there's the budget resolution for the next fiscal year that Republicans are proposing through a process called reconciliation. That is the $4.5 trillion tax giveaway to billionaires that guts Medicaid, right? And by the way, we could talk a bit more about, expound a bit in greater detail on the Medicaid cuts.
We should,
because I think folks think that, they assume that we're only talking about underserved populations and vulnerable populations. And of course, that's a big part of Medicaid funding in terms of life-saving healthcare for those individuals. But it also includes senior care. Vast majority of senior citizens
Right.
who are receiving long-term care and nursing care are not paying for those services through Medicare. They're paying for those services through Medicaid.
Right.
And so it would be disastrous. I mean, real deep impact.
I think something like 1.1 million Coloradans are relying on that.
Correct. On Medicaid in some form or another, right? So you're talking about 1/5 of the state's population.
Right.
And
that's crazy.
And I can't imagine, think whether it's Colorado or, Louisiana, right? Or Washington State. I mean, you go down the list. So in any event, that is the budget reconciliation that they are pursuing. That's very extreme, and that I think is out of step with Americans' priorities and values. There's, of course, the pressing nature of what's in front of us in terms of funding the government. The federal government is operating off of a continuing resolution that was passed in December and that expires on March 14th. As you said, in the 118th Congress, Republican dysfunction and chaos was the norm, and they really ultimately could not govern without the assistance of House Democrats. And so on a variety of different occasions, House Democrats stepped forward to do the responsible, thing on behalf of the American people, and ultimately reach a consensus in terms of funding the government. So, with respect to that particular conversation, I would just say this: there obviously will be caucus-wide conversations, and the leader Jeffries, consulting with the appropriations ranking member Rosa DeLauro and others in terms of how to proceed as we near that date. And I don't want to telegraph publicly, kind of how those negotiations would unfold. There'll be, internal conversations. What I would say, though, is more broadly, is I think what will take center stage over the next coming weeks in Washington is the necessity for ironclad, right, recognition that if you are passing a budget and appropriating dollars, that those dollars are actually expended the way that Congress has dictated. And it goes back to your core question about my Republican colleagues of what they run to serve in the Congress, to serve in the people's house, right, on behalf of their constituents, and to make their constituents' voices heard on a particular appropriation, that they believe this amount of money should be spent for this particular purpose. Because, of course, this is taxpayer money, not
Right.
Donald Trump's money or Elon Musk's. It's taxpayer money. And the idea that, notwithstanding that vote and that particular appropriation being signed into law, that the president of the United States of either political party could simply disregard it and choose to
Right.
spend the money the way they would like. Clearly, that does not comport with any kind of bipartisan, budget agreement. So, yeah, at the end of the day, Republicans have a responsibility. They have a majority in the House. They have a majority in the Senate. You have a Republican president. They have an obligation to fund the government and to keep the lights on. They have already begun, in some respects, kind of a partial shutdown by virtue of what they're doing agency by agency, trying to
Right.
dismantle these agencies. So we'll see what they come up with, but that really is incumbent upon them. And insofar as there is a shutdown, it will be because Republicans have chosen to pursue this reckless spending plan that we talked about and enable the president to completely disregard appropriations and the law of the land. And that will be something that I think, will have to be accountable for to the American people.
What would you say to people who are concerned about Elon Musk and the fact that he doesn't seem to have an actual role in the government, but he seems to be making a lot of decisions? How do we address that?
Yeah, I mean, the arrangement itself, right? I mean, I share the frustrations and the concerns of a lot of folks in Colorado who've certainly reached out to me and in my office about this particular issue. And the arrangement itself is so unprecedented and unheard of. And without the appropriate safeguards in place, and of course, an administration that would follow those safeguards, obviously, as we know, it creates an environment that's very rife for potential abuses, right? In terms of the access to taxpayer data and
Right.
social security
Like these
records and
20-year-old
IRS
kids.
records. Yeah, I mean, it is nonsensical, right? I mean, it is it's absurd. There are a number of lawsuits that are pending, right, that challenge Doge's access to different government systems, the payment systems, kind of the central nerve payment system within the Department of Treasury, as an example. There have been challenges as well about the constitutionality of both the role of Doge and of Mr. Musk individually under the appointments clause of the Constitution, right? Because ultimately, to exert the kind of influence and take the kinds of actions that they are clearly taking, one would need to be, under the appointments clause of the Constitution, be confirmed by the cabinet, be a member of the cabinet and ultimately subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, right? That's a constitutional safeguard that was built into our system from the get-go, and it's clearly not being respected now. So there's a case proceeding on that basis, and we'll see how that unfolds. I think their temporary restraining order was denied in that case a few days ago, but there'll be a preliminary injunction hearing in the coming weeks. We have a bill in terms of, I talked about the task force and kind of the legislative response part of this. We have a bill called the Taxpayer Data Protection Act. Very simple bill that would simply say your data, your taxpayer data of an American citizen belongs to you. Again, does not belong to President Trump, doesn't belong to Doge, and would create some safeguards to ensure that that information is not accessible by, unelected individuals. That bill has broad support in the House Democratic Caucus. And because the Republican majority is so slim, we would only need 3 Republican colleagues, just 3 Republican members of Congress, to join that effort, and we could get a vote on that bill Monday.
Right.
So
it's hard to argue against, man. I mean, if you're a Republican.
I don't know how it could possibly be controversial. I mean, again, there's, we obviously, folks have different views about particular public policy issues and ideological differences, but that is not this, right? This is just we're talking about protecting the data of every American taxpayer. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or unaffiliated. It's just that personal data, should not be accessible by unelected individuals who are now apparently playing a role in our government.
People are obviously frustrated. I think it's good to hear. It's great to hear that efforts are underway. Like these aren't overnight things, but Democrats are trying, and the gears are turning. What would you say to people who want to do something
Mhm.
and want to get involved somehow? Where do they direct their energy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a couple of different things. So first, and I know I said this earlier, but I don't think it can be overstated. Sharing your story insofar as you are impacted directly by one of these executive orders or by one of the agency actions, sharing your story with your representative. We have a portal that the leader has created, Leader Jeffries has created, and that the task force is working to amplify, that enables Americans across the country and certainly Coloradans to be able to share their stories. Those stories will then be amplified and utilized by the task force in terms of preparing a legislative response, or informing our oversight steps, or the legal strategies, and then of course also in the court of public opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
To ultimately convince the administration to reverse course. You read these stories about individuals who are indiscriminately fired from an agency, the Department of Energy, right? Folks who are doing work in connection with a nuclear stockpile. And as those stories become public, the administration is then compelled to immediately reverse, their actions, right? And so that sharing of stories is incredibly important. So that would be one thing that I think folks should do. Staying informed, staying engaged. We're having a lot of town halls. We're soliciting feedback and insight. We did, I think, 5 town halls in the last 2 weeks. A lot of in-person town halls in where I guess Estes Park, Fort Collins, Longmont, they're kind of blending together. Nederland, just doing a lot, right, to make sure that folks have the ability to talk to their representative. And by the way, every member of Congress should be doing these town halls, Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's, I wouldn't hazard to make a suggestion as to how folks interact, right, with their representatives, but I would think communicating your concerns, right, through a phone call or sending an email or sending a letter and making a request for a town hall is something that I think is eminently reasonable to do. And then, of course, there's the political lens, right? I mean, the reality is the next election, and I recognize people, generally don't like to get too fixated on the next election so close, and sort of in terms of recency,
But it's true, yeah.
to the last election. But the next election is 19 months away, right? At 20 months away. And we will have an opportunity to win a majority in the House of Representatives. We only need to win 3 seats to ultimately ensure that Democrats have a majority. There will be special elections. There are 2 special elections right now in Florida, scheduled congressional special elections in April. And then, of course, likely to be one in New York later in the year. So there will be opportunities. There are opportunities already for folks that, insofar as they disagree with the way in which this administration is approaching its work and believe that there needs to be a check and balance, that supporting House Democrats across the country who are doing their part is really important. So those are a couple of ways.
Is there a central location? Is there a website that is going to have all this information that you can direct people to?
Yes, so we're working, right now there are a number of different places you can sort of access, data specific information on how one's community is being impacted through the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, the DPCC in the House, which is an entity that I used to lead. You can access, of course, political information through the DCCC. So there are a lot of different places. I think we're endeavoring in terms of the task force to build out a place where folks can be able to access a better sense of the legislative, the oversight, and the legal strategies we're adopting. So we're working on that now. Hope to have that out in short order.
And we'll obviously keep our listeners and viewers updated when that is available. How are you doing all this and doing your regular job and doing and being a dad? How do you keep all this together, man?
That's a good question. I mean, look, I'm lucky. I have, an incredible wife, Andrea, who's just as wonderful and is such a great partner. And, we have wonderful kids. My 6-year-old daughter, Natalie, who, as I mentioned, got her big basketball game tonight. And our 2-year-old son, he's not 2 quite yet, so he'll be 2 in May. Joshua, who's, getting in all sorts of trouble constantly and keeping us all on our toes. But they keep me grounded and, continue to motivate me to do the work. But it's a privilege. I mean, to be able to represent my community and do this work at a particularly precarious time, right? And I think about my job is far less difficult than the civil servants who are being unceremoniously terminated at these
Yeah.
federal agencies. And so, keeping that perspective has been is important for me, and I think important for all of us, because there's a lot of people this week who, gave a lot of years to the federal government serving the public, who found out that they don't have jobs anymore, right, and are trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet,
Yeah.
and are still thinking about who's going to perform the public service, the vital functions that they have been serving in their absence. So that's where the focus is.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Thank you for everything you're doing to help push back against this administration, against Doge Destroyer, Congressman Joe Neguse. Thanks again for joining us here.
Just Congressman, just Joe.
Well, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it.
And I have not yet taken a listen because you just recorded that like earlier in the day, but I will catch up with it with the rest of the audience. Hi, I'm back for like an episode.
How are things
Hey.
with two small humans?
Good. Okay, I gotta take this in like chunks. So the world, it's so bad out there, man. Holy shit. I wanted to like do a bit where like I pretended that I wasn't paying attention to anything, and then like you told me what had happened and I like just reacted, but it's too dark and I have been paying attention way more than I wanted to and way more than I thought I would. So
It's
here are the
hard
top
not
lines.
to.
Mom and baby are doing great. Sam was born on January 25th, 7 pounds, 1/2 an ounce, which is a little bit early. So we had a little bit of a scary medical thing that kind of prompted us to go to the hospital. But thank God, everybody's doing great. Mom's doing great. Believe it or not, the same delivery doc who brought Davis into the world just happened to be at the hospital that night.
Wow.
And she delivered Sam too. So that
What
was really
odds?
cool. Yeah, I have no idea, but not super great. So she rules. Dr. Reed was amazing. The whole team was amazing. Brittany was especially amazing. But it just, one of the things it did was it reminded us like how important it is to be in a state like Colorado and not a state like
Yeah.
Arkansas or something, because like things went a little bit wrong with the pregnancy. Thank God everybody's okay. But the fact that like we had a medical care team that was focused on medicine and not politics or policy or whatever just took a big fucking scary question mark off the table. Davis is now 5 and he is an extraordinary big brother. I'm a big brother. Brittany's a big sister. And both of us at various points when our parents brought our younger siblings home from the hospital said things like, "Can you please bring them back now?" He has not said that once. He loves being a big brother. He calls, you're going to love this especially, he calls Sam Baby Nugget or Baby Nuggy. And every day, first thing in the morning when he comes out of his room, he goes, "Can I kiss Nuggy?" And he just like goes over and like kisses him on the head. He is extraordinary. It is so cool. I'm like tearing up.
Well, wait
So
till
it's
he
been, like-
starts playing with his toys, though.
Yeah, it's been like 3 weeks. We're all doing okay. It is really rough out there, and Brittany may very well, by the time somebody hears this recording, be on a plane back to Washington, D.C., which, because of the state of planes at the moment, is like pretty harrowing stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, but she still doesn't have the ability to vote from home, proxy voting, even though, I don't know if you saw this, Byron Donaldson is apparently just giving his card to people so he can go do TV hits, and they're voting by proxy, the Republicans, whenever the fuck they want to, but a new mom doesn't get to, even if she's under a flight restriction for medical reasons. Anyway, you asked. That's what's going on, and thank you. It's good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, you too. Good to, I haven't brought any children into the world that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
So-
but you did that a long time ago.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I can sit back and enjoy your foibles with children.
Yeah, man, he is sweet and he's delightfully cute and he is growing fast and all the good things. He had jaundice, so he had to have him in like the little baby tanning bed with like the little baby
Right.
goggles for like 48 hours, which
Nice.
was really tough because we couldn't leave him alone. So we were just like sleeping in shifts and all this stuff. And yeah, I'm probably not making a ton of sense because I've been on like 3-4 hours of sleep a night for the last 3 weeks. But thank God, everybody's
That's
doing
all right.
okay.
You're still making more sense than Donald Trump, who
Good
we'll start with.
transition.
This will be an abbreviated version of Trump time because we talked so much about it with Congressman Neguse, but we wanted to highlight some hopeful news. Americans are at last waking up to the problem of Trump and Prime Minister Elon Musk.
Oh, I like that. Prime Minister. That's good. That's like an accurate depiction of the power dynamic here, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Results from several new polls show wide disapproval with Trump administration decisions. This is important because, as we discussed in the interview with Congressman Neguse, it's still clear that public opinion does actually have an effect on this White House.
Yeah, and it's also a lagging indicator, right? Like, these guys do something, a poll goes into the field, people react to it, and those things don't sync up in time. So odds are the inertia of the negative reaction to what they're doing, which is just the worst shit over and over again in every conceivable way possible, from abandoning Ukraine to firing half the federal workforce willy-nilly with no rhyme or reason to clearly just stealing people's personal information with this Doge bag thing. I mean, this is the stuff that I've picked up kind of barely making contact with the news. I'm sure the list is longer than that. But yeah, people don't want this. Nobody voted for this. They voted for Donald Trump because they were like pissed off about how expensive things have gotten. I don't think we should do the egg trope, even though those have gotten like twice as expensive anyway. But no, nobody wanted like the full-scale destruction of the federal government overnight.
Well, let's start with this scene from a recent town hall meeting in Georgia where a constituent confronts Republican Representative Rich McCormick.
Tyranny is rising in the White House, and a man has declared himself our king.
Listen to that accent.
I'd like to know, rather, the people would like to know what you, congressmen, and your fellow congressmen are going to do to rein in the megalomaniac in the White House.
Yeah, babe. That's given 2017.
That's great stuff.
That's like Cory Gardner town hall level shit going on right
Absolutely.
away. And so do you know, as we're recording today on February 21st, this is the 17 to minus 25, I don't know, 5th anniversary of the first Cardboard Cory town hall meeting today, as we're recording?
Oh, today? Yeah, I guess it would have been, about
February
that
21st.
time.
Yep. Time to face the music, y'all.
Well, the music is sounding a little rough for Trump, particularly because of Trumpflation. We'll talk about a couple of polls here, but let's start with this CNN poll and David Chalian of CNN talking about why this is troubling for Sir Donald.
The crown thing, I just can't even wrap my head around.
Is actually a numeric high in CNN polling for Trump ever. Across the 4 years of his first administration, we never saw him at 47% approval in CNN polling. Now, just want to point out, though, we also have never seen anybody but Donald Trump this low at the start of a new term, right? So for Trump, he's doing well. Compared to all of his predecessors, this is below where all of them were at this point beginning their presidencies. You also can look at that 47% approval by party, and I think this is instructive. Obviously, you don't expect many Democrats to approve of the way Trump is handling his job. That's only at 11%. But look at that middle column, Sarah. Independents. He's only at 43% approval, 56% disapproval among that critical swath of the middle of the electorate. And then, of course, Republicans are largely with him, 88% approval there, Sarah. You mentioned the big one. I think this is one of the biggest warning signs for the president on prices being lowered. 62% say that he has not gone far enough to reduce the price of everyday goods.
That's because there's nothing he can fucking do.
This is what he promised to do, and we've heard him in the last several weeks try to temper expectations when he speaks publicly that getting prices down may be tough. But this was issue number one for America in the election, and you can see such a large swath of Americans, and that includes a bunch of Republicans who don't think he's gone far enough yet to reduce prices.
I do love that there's like 11%. So he's gone too far in lowering prices. Like, what the fuck is that? That's just noise. Can I show you something? I've been posting a little bit. We've been posting a little bit while I'm out, and I wanted to show the sort of 538 averages of Trump's approval rating compared with President Biden's approval rating in the first sort of month of the term, right? So January 24th, 4 days after inauguration is when the first poll came out. He was at an 8% average approval rating, right? The disapproves
that's normal for like a new president, people generally are like, oh, okay, we'll give him a
So
shot.
it's normal to be right side up, which means your approvals are better than your disapprovals. But I want to show you why I'm contextualizing this in a second. February 19th, he's already down to plus 2.5. So the disapprovals have risen 5 points from 41.5 to 46.2, and the approvals have dropped from 49.7 approved to 48.7. So there's still a decent amount of basement on the approval drop, but the disapproves are climbing. Now, what's really interesting is compare this with Joe Biden's first couple of weeks in office. He started with a plus 23 approval rating to disapproval deficit. 53.1% approved of the job Joe Biden was doing, 30% disapproved, and then a month later he was still at 15.3. So compare that with Donald Trump's plus 2%, and you can see the bottom is going to start dropping out of this thing pretty fast.
Yeah, and here's even more data on that. Here's more on the CNN poll showing that Trump hasn't gone far enough in cutting prices. Every single one of these, not far enough, not far enough, not far enough.
Yeah, for audio
not far enough.
Listeners, it says using the power of the presidency and the executive branch, 52% gone too far. Only 8% said gone far enough. Even like the Trump people are like, all right, like you might have tested the boundaries here.
Right.
Cutting federal government programs, 51% gone too far, 32% about right. Changing the way the U.S. government works, 48% too far, 32% about right. Deporting immigrants living in the United States illegally, 45% gone too far, 39% about right. Man, I wish those numbers were different. And then trying to reduce the price of everyday goods, 11% gone too far. Again, what the fuck is that? 27% about right, 62% not gone far enough. And again, he lied about the ability to do this, but it's mostly because the president of the United States does not control the price of everyday goods.
Right.
And the
But again,
budget
don't promise
maneuvers
it,
they're
man.
doing right now, the tax cuts, the trillions of dollars in debt ceiling increases they want, and then, God forbid, they do this like insane, Doge dividend thing. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Elon Musk wants to give everybody $5,000 checks, thinking that, first of all, that won't be inflationary. If it's inflationary when Joe Biden does it, it's inflationary when Donald Trump and Elon Musk do it. To say nothing of the fact that, like, they're not saving enough money in these cuts that they're doing, no matter how drastic they are, to give everybody that much money in a check. They think they can just buy people off, and they're stupid. It's not going to work.
Here's another poll I think is really interesting from the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey. 40% of consumers spontaneously mention tariffs. That
In
means
terms
that
of, like,
people are
what they're
getting
concerned with? Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're getting it. Tariffs aren't good.
Tariffs are a tax on consumers. Tariffs don't do anything else. They increase the price of goods. That's what it is. It is nothing else. It is fucking insane that we're even having this conversation. Everybody who knows anything knows this. And I guess
it's great
Americans
news that
are
people
waking
get
up.
it.
Yep.
And almost 40% of consumers blame high prices for eroding their living standards. Not good, Donald.
Joe Biden got blamed for high prices when he was president, even though it was not really his fault. Donald Trump is going to get blamed for high prices, especially because he has a trifecta. Most people know that Republicans are running the entire government right now, right? Even if you don't think that much about politics or read that much about politics, you know that those guys are in charge. So they're the ones who are going to get the blame.
And finally, Gallup just registered Trump's worst economic approval rating ever.
That's really interesting. I saw this headline and I was like, was it real? This is worse than it was like in the middle of COVID when like 1 million people died and like businesses were closing everywhere. Like this is still worse than that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And that really does not bode well for him. So
we've
good
talked
news
about this
there.
before, but like most of the time these numbers only go in one direction.
Yeah. They don't jump back and forth.
Especially
if you
with
start
like,
going down, you keep going down.
especially with the moves they're making. Everything they're doing is going to increase costs or at the very least not decrease them.
All right, let's move on to something a little less cheery. And this is Donald Trump's new weird decision to restate history in his own image. Here he is talking about the Ukraine.
I mean, it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, isn't it?
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president. And I've been watching these these, people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way.
Why a dome?
Do you think he knows anything about this at all?
Do you think he knows where Ukraine is?
I had a friend who used to say that the one question every politician needs to answer upon running for office is, can you point out Ukraine on a map?
Right. Russia invaded Ukraine. We all saw it on TV.
He's essentially saying, if Ukraine surrendered something, the war would have ended. No, it fucking wouldn't. That's not what this is about. Russia wants to reunite the old Russian Empire from the fucking Dark Ages.
Right. They don't want just part of Ukraine. They want
all of Ukraine. And if you give them a little bit, what are they going to do?
Right.
This guy's fucking deranged. Holy shit. And it's a Kremlin agitprop talking point to say that Ukraine started this war. No, they fucking didn't. Russia invaded this country all by itself.
And this is something that finally actually got some pushback from otherwise completely weak Senate Republicans. Take a look.
And joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland. He serves on the Senate Foreign Relations, Appropriations, and Budget Committees. Senator, great to have you. Let's listen to what some of your Republican colleagues had to say about President Trump's comments about President Zelensky.
Make no mistake about it, that invasion was the responsibility of one human being on the face of this planet. It was Vladimir Putin.
It is quite
good.
Who started the war? It was absolutely Russia at Putin's directive. I don't think that there should be any confusion with that.
Putin is a gangster. He's a gangster with a black heart. And as I've said in another context, I trust this guy like I trust gas stations sushi.
Senator, this strikes me as a rare moment where Republicans aren't on the same page. They aren't going along with President Trump. How do you see it?
Well, Anna, I think every American should be absolutely ashamed at what Donald Trump has done and said. He literally threw the Ukrainian people under the bus. He's thrown freedom-loving people around the world under the bus. I met with President Zelensky in Munich just this past weekend, along with many of my Republican colleagues, some of whose tape you just played, and we all assured him that the United States remained firm in our support for the Ukrainian people.
Well, some of the United States.
Senator Michael Bennet, meanwhile, who just got back from Ukraine, apparently, is planning to call an amendment that says the Senate believes that Russia, not Ukraine, started the war. Apparently, the language is supposed to be very simple in order to try to get Republican votes.
Good.
Who knows what they'll do, but
call it on the carpet, make them take a vote. At least Murkowski and Tillis are in the hallway talking about it. Okay, cool. Money where your mouth is.
Absolutely. And before we get off this subject, Trump the King.
This is fucking insane. Whole entire country started against kings. That was the point. This is not an original take at this point, I'm sure of it, but Jesus fucking Christ, are we kidding with this? This is from
This is the White House official X account.
Don't call it that. It's Twitter. It'll always be Twitter, even if that loser is fucking running it into the ground.
But this is the official account. This
Insane
isn't like
shit.
the campaign. This isn't like Trump's page.
This is actually one of the things I was most worried about, losing this election, is we are in the era of the worst AI slot possible. So all you have to do is type this shit into Grok or whatever, and there it is. It spits it right out. Trump the King. He loves it. Hit send.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And then, of course, he is talking about being the king in more than.
Oh, he's back on the I'm going to run again thing, which is
Yep.
fucking constitutionally prohibited from doing. That's good.
Yeah. Maybe I could run, right? Sure. And he's even getting some support, I guess, from former White House advisor Steve Bannon, who also is all in, just like Elon Musk, with the Nazis now.
Yeah, a couple posts in real life. One is days without a senior Trump advisor performing a Nazi salute in public is now 0. And I saw this one. This is a good one from
Here we go.
Marianne.
The only way that
Go ahead.
You're good. From Marianne Ten Houten says, if you are at an event where someone on stage gives a Hitler salute and that person is not dragged off by security and kicked out, you are at a Nazi rally. That is correct.
Right. Here's what that looks like.
the only way that they win is we retreat. And we're not going to retreat. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to quit. Fight, fight, fight.
Whoa.
Yeah, and the crowd goes wild because you're at a Nazi rally. It's how many Sieg Heils do you have to have before people start to go, we may have a Nazi problem in our coalition.
And that particular Nazi, Steve Bannon, by the way, will be the keynote speaker for the Colorado Republican Party.
Friend of the pod, Seth Maskett, had a great tweet about this.
Their big annual fundraising dinner in March.
He said, saluted Hitler yesterday, invited to speak at the Colorado GOP fundraiser today. Absolutely perfect stuff.
Yeah, unreal. Well, we've talked about how to resist the Trump administration. Here's how not to do it.
Yeah, so like a lot of the discourse, right, has been like, what are these feckless Democrats doing? Like, where's Chuck Schumer? And I get that. Like, I understand that like attacking Democrats might feel good, but the thing is, like, it won't have the outcome you want or we need. I go back to my philosophy schooling a lot these days, and there's two schools of thought on ethics, or many more, but the two you learn in the sort of 101 is Immanuel Kant, deontology, what matters, your intention, or the John Stuart Mill, consequentialism or utilitarianism, what matters is what happens. And I feel like this is like a big problem in the progressive or Democratic coalition right now, because people seem to care a lot more about input than output and outcome. And I think outcome matters quite a bit more than intention and input. Like the material differences that are going to be made in people's lives if they're able to cut Medicaid by $880 billion, which is essentially the entire Medicaid budget. If they're able to gut half or more of the federal workforce, these things will have actual material impacts on people's lives. So what can you do about it, right? You can and should make sure your Democratic member of Congress or senator is going to vote no on the heinous Musk-Trump agenda, whatever it takes form of a piece of legislation, right? Like, that's a given. And for Colorado's entire Democratic congressional delegation, you can pretty much rest assured that's what's going to happen. I don't see Joe Neguse or Brittany or Diana DeGette or Jason Crow voting for anything that Trump or Musk want them to do, right? Call, make sure your voice is heard, go ahead, but like protesting outside their offices feels like a waste of time and energy. A lot of the action that we're seeing right now is essentially loudly demanding that Democrats do something without giving them like concrete ideas, falling back on the old, well, you got elected, so it's your job to figure out what to do, which again, like, go ahead and make sure they're going to vote no on this shit. But there are 3 Republican members of Congress in Colorado, starting with Gabe Evans and including our favorite bread sandwich, Jeff Hurd from the 3rd, and even Jeff Crank down in the Springs, who could absolutely lose their seats in 2026 if they decide that they'd rather serve Elon Musk and Donald Trump than the voters who sent them to D.C. Go after these guys. Protesting outside Democratic offices for people who are going to vote the way you want seems like wasted energy, especially when there are plenty of Republicans who can move to vote no on things like the budget and reconciliation. They can only lose 3 votes in the House and 4 votes in the Senate, and the agenda is fucking dead. Do you want to make a point, or do you want to make a difference? This is the question that you have to answer. It occurs to me that if I were a Republican donor or operative or whatever, I can't really think of something different I would do to divide and conquer the Democratic coalition than to get the activists to train their fire on their own people instead of the handful of Republicans who can absolutely lose their seats or absolutely vote no and crater these fucking terrible ideas in the House and the Senate. And rant.
Absolutely true. That advice extends to our own Democratic elected officials. Here's Kyle Clark talking about Governor Jared Polis.
Democratic governors are taking a variety of approaches in response to President Trump's sweeping attempts to consolidate power and change American government. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker drew a parallel to the authoritarian methods used by the Nazis to overrule the German Constitution. New York Governor Kathy Hochul stood up to Trump, declaring himself the king, saying that America is a nation of laws, not ruled by a king. While Colorado Governor Jared Polis continues to go out of his way to praise the Trump administration and look for common ground. Today, Polis repackaged Trump's suggestion of getting rid of FEMA as their shared goal of government efficiency.
I think most governors would agree. I certainly would that, for instance, FEMA, emergency management, has many issues. The federal government should do better. They should restructure it.
No one's arguing.
You know, the wrecking ball approach might not be the most efficient way to get a better outcome for less money.
Governor Polis attended Trump's inauguration after effusively praising the nomination of anti-vaccine activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead on health policy. That earned Polis praise from the Colorado Republican Party.
It doesn't feel like he was exactly endorsing the dismantling of FEMA in that statement for what it's worth.
Right. But I don't, and I also don't think Polis is like endorsing anything in the Trump administration, but he's doing this thing where he's trying to get to the point in a roundabout way, and it's losing the point.
Here's where I'll give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Like, we have learned, and it is going to be more clear in the next 2 to 4 years for sure, that Donald Trump is a vengeful person who takes things personally, who reads his clips, and who will ask an advisor, hey, that Democrat in Kansas or Colorado, what have they said about me lately? Oh, yeah? We should cut off funding for them as a result.
Right.
So, like, I am somewhat sympathetic to the idea that the governor can't, like, go and pick a fight with this guy for fear of him pulling back every dollar of federal funding that we get. However, Jared Polis is like really popular. He's like he's got plus 20 approval rating in the last poll I think we saw.
He's term limited.
He's term limited. I think we do expect him to kind of like throw some punches back and stand up, right? So I think he's got to do a little bit better job of balancing those two sides of like trying to protect the state from like being a piñata for the Trump administration to beat the shit out of us, but also to like show that he's going to fight back on the obvious litany of horrific things. Just pick one. Like, Trump is firing a giant amount of federal workers. Colorado, or Denver, I think specifically, has the second largest number of federal workers outside of Washington, D.C. Fight back on that, for sure. Like, you don't want that many people laid off in your state, right? You don't want your unemployment rate going up because of this.
Absolutely.
There are spots to pick to fight back, and let's hope and believe that he will start doing.
Let's talk about the man who is close to becoming our 8th favorite member of Congress from Colorado.
Tied for 8th right now,
Tied
from where
for
I
8th.
sit. Yeah.
Gabe Evans can't even find the courage to oppose Medicaid cuts, which House Speaker Mike Johnson included in the latest Republican budget proposal. 1.1 million Coloradans rely on Medicaid funding. That includes 20% of his own district.
To say nothing of the fact that, click that children under age 18 little button right there, would you, at the top? Yep, that one. Now go right over to the 8th. Wowza!
Yeah,
36.9%. That's 4 out of 10 kids. That's 2 out of 5. 2 out of 5 kids in the 8th congressional district have some reliance or get some benefit out of the Medicaid program, whether that's dental, whether that's health care, whatever it is. Gabe Evans is dooming 2 out of 5 children in his own district to go without health care. What the fuck is that?
And it's not like he doesn't have cover. 8 Republicans in districts with large Hispanic populations wrote a letter opposing any cuts to Medicaid, but Gabish isn't smart enough to join them.
I kind of feel like this is almost like checkmate. Like, this is almost all you need to run on in 2 years if you're running against Gabe. Is like, this guy wouldn't join with his own party to protect healthcare for 2 out of 5 children in his district.
There's Gabe hiding in his office. The other thing I think is funny about this, too, is even Lauren Boebert is smart enough to speak out differently than Gabe. She says, quote, President Trump has said he does not want to cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, and I stand with him on that commitment, unquote.
That is like obviously bad faith bullshit, but she's smart enough to message it.
Right. She's smart enough to say it. All right, let's talk about something that we've just kind of brought back in the last week or so, legislating with crayons.
Well, they're certainly doing it down at the old state house, aren't they?
We talked about that January 6th resolution in the state Senate in a recent episode. The resolution is condemning President Trump's pardons of all January 6th insurrectionists.
Of whom we have like a disproportionate amount in Colorado, don't we?
Yeah, there's 20, 30 of them here. Republicans in the state Senate restrained themselves from being too stupid, though they all voted against the resolution. We predicted at the time that Republicans would be less smart when that resolution got to the state house. I would not have guessed that they would literally show their asses.
With pants on, for what it's worth, in case those of your imaginations are running wild out there. They kept their pants on. But what did they do?
Here they are.
Whereas 4 Capitol police officers who defended the Capitol.
You'll notice they're all facing the other direction.
Turning
of the
their
podium.
back on the reader who was talking about the people who attacked Capitol police officers. This is the party of law and order, right, Jason?
Yeah. Party of something. Jesus, man. I can't believe they're doing this.
And just to show truly how out of touch they are, I think you put this in the little outline here, but a Washington Post Ipsos poll show that Americans oppose pardoning the violent January 6th offenders by 83 to 14%.
Yeah, it's not even close.
And even Republicans, 70 to 27 oppose. 70% oppose, 27% support pardoning these guys. This is obviously insane. I just don't know why the fuck anybody would have voted for this guy again. It's not like we didn't warn him.
House Republican Brandy Bradley, who we've talked about before, Boxwine Brandy Bradley. Brandy Bradley basically said that a majority of Americans approved of the pardoning. Not according to the majority of Americans.
And it's like, let's say there's a 20-point polling error in this Ipsos Washington Post poll. Nope, still not a majority. Like,
right.
What? Jesus Christ.
Right. And then she goes ahead later on. We're recording on the same day that they're doing this. They're in like the 4th or 5th hour of their opposition to this. And Brandy Bradley said the quiet part out loud on Twitter.
Good.
That's all this is.
It turns out
bullshit.
that after that tweet, they went ahead and passed the resolution and then passed some more bills.
Right.
Good stuff.
But it's all just performative nonsense. On another note, there was some hilarious, sarcastic testimony recently on legislation from Republican Ken Dildo DeGraff that sought to make it illegal to do transgender operations till you're the age of 26 or something. Listen to this person who goes by the name of, she'll say her name here. I don't know who she is. I don't know how to spell it, which is good since you don't have to see that. But this is some good stuff.
Vice Chair Carter and members of the committee, my name is Jade Kelly, and I'm here today as a proud Mom for Liberty Facebook member to voice my full and unwavering support for House Bill 1254. And like Representative DeGraff, I understand well that many Coloradans are distracted by minor inconveniences like skyrocketing healthcare costs, the erosion of basic civil rights, the inability to afford bread and eggs. There is a far greater existential threat looming over our state, the transgender Marxists. These radical leftists have infiltrated every aspect of our society, our schools, our workplaces, our unions, our Facebook groups, and yes, even our 26-year-old children's little vulnerable minds. We all know that 26 is the new 6, and these adults who can legally drink, vote, and serve in the military are simply too young and impressionable to make decisions about their own health care. Without swift and government intervention, they could be tricked into gender transition by insidious influences like by licensed medical professionals, therapists, and surgeons. We must be vigilant. Every day, I fear for the safety of full-grown adults who could be lured into a life of gender transition through dangerous methods such as behavior therapy, also known as brainwashing with basic human compassion, still existing. If we do not act now, what's next? Will we let adults make their own medical decisions? Will we start trusting doctors instead of politicians? I shudder at the thought. Thank you for your time, committee members, and for protecting fully grown legal adult children for making their choices about their own bodies. God bless Colorado, and God bless government overreach.
Oh yeah, way to go. That's really good shit.
Yeah, well done. That's how you get your testimony in front of the people. All right, let's do some quick hits, and then we'll roll out of here this week. Tommy Tuberville, the not very bright senator from Alabama, proved again why he really shouldn't be anywhere near the levers of power. Tuberville says he's all for cuts at the Pentagon, including downsizing its staff. He says, quote, "I wouldn't be against them taking it from a pentagon to a trigon. Cut a couple of sides off of it," unquote.
Jesus fucking Christ.
The word for a three-sided object is triangle.
I don't know. I kind of like trigon better, though, for what it's worth. It's a little more badass. Trigon.
An idiot.
Jesus Christ. They're not sending their best.
No, they are not. Doge, meanwhile, the Elon Musk creation that's cutting things randomly and without a lot of forethought, is also not real good with its decimals, apparently. Here's a headline from the New York Times. Doge claimed it saved $8 billion in one contract for, I believe it was the Department of Homeland Security. Turns out it was actually $8 million.
It's just 3 zeros off, dude. Zeros don't even count. Like, why are you getting so bent out of shape about this?
It was 8 something.
8 something, million, billion, couple million here, billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. And again, like, it's like they're taking AI, they're like scraping the budget, they're creating a spreadsheet, probably with AI, and they're like, AI, cut the budget. And they're like, yep, we did it. We fixed the government.
Right.
No one could possibly get hurt by this, right? This is just like tech being awesome.
Right.
And they're like lying about how many people are like getting Social Security. Like, it's just, it's so fucking bad. And I'm in a filter bubble because I don't look at Facebook or Twitter or any of that shit. I only look at Blue Sky very rarely at this point. So like my contact with this stuff is like pretty slim. But like, are there people, I mean, the polling is starting to show that maybe this is not the case, but are there people who are like, yeah, this is great? Like, they're doing an awesome job, keep it up? Feels like that is at least diminishing, if not sliding off.
It's that 10% of people who think Trump has done too much to help lower prices.
Yeah. Just stop! You're lowering prices too fast! We can't possibly handle it!
Those are the people who are still on board. Colorado Republicans have somehow found another terrible candidate for Congress. I swear it's like they're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, it's like, and it's always against Jason Crow. Like Jason, like our friend of the pod, Jason Crow, might have like the best opposition recruitment operation going under the surface out of fucking anybody we've ever met, because it is just brainworms all the way down with everybody who ever runs against him.
No Republican's going to beat Crow in 26, especially given the Democratic makeup of the district, but maybe Republicans should just not shoot themselves in the face. Instead, they're going to run a guy named Rich Guggenheim, who is the Colorado chapter leader and national legislative director of Gays Against Groomers. As the Colorado Times Recorder reports, in a radio interview in January, Guggenheim called gay people who support Democrats, quote, slaves on the rainbow plantation picking glitter, unquote.
Record scratch. Good Lord.
And this is your candidate for Congress in the 6th Congressional District.
I mean, again, like, they're not sending their best, but like anybody with a brain would not raise their hand to run against Jason Crow because you're not gonna win. So this is sort of the natural consequence of it.
Right. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, the former oil and gas executive from Colorado, is acknowledging a fairly big mistake in firing a bunch of people who are kind of important for keeping track of our nuclear weapons stockpile.
Again, when you just short the spreadsheet and fire by like tenure or salary, you're going to catch some nuclear weapons experts.
Here's Kyle Clark of 9 News.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright, fossil fuel exec from Colorado, really has his hands full in his new role. President Trump said he picked Wright because of his expertise with extracting oil and gas. But the Department of Energy handles way more, including a shared responsibility for America's nuclear arsenal.
Oops.
And if Wright planned to frack it till you make it, he has had a rude awakening. He now says they made a mistake in firing nuclear security workers.
We are right-sizing the department, and I probably moved a little too quickly there. And when we made mistakes on layoffs in NNSA, we reversed them immediately, less than 24 hours.
NBC News reported the Department of Energy struggled to rehire its nuclear safety staff because they didn't have their email addresses, their personal emails. NBC said that Wright's department was asking colleagues if they had personal contacts for their friends who got fired.
It's like, you're fired from this bloated bureaucracy, you useless bureaucrat, you bloat on American budgetary salience. How fucking dare you? Actually, could you please come back to work? We did not realize that you were in charge of something super duper important.
And what are the odds that Chris Wright fired people while he was on the ski slopes?
Yeah, that's quite the contrast for viewers. You can see he's got the sort of reverse raccoon eyes going on with the ski goggle tan. Good Lord, dude. At least throw some fucking sunscreen on your face.
What a dick. These people. All right, and finally our gibberish of the week. Here's Vice President J.D. Vance explaining what it's like to be a man.
First, you tattoo on the eyeliner.
Is because, you know, when I think about, like, what is the essence of masculinity? You could answer this in so many different ways, but when I think about me and my guy friends, we really like to tell jokes to one another. Is because...
I mean, we tell jokes. I like jokes.
So we're manly?
Men's men. I'm a man's man. I tell a joke with my
That's
man
all it
friends.
takes. Fantastic.
I guess. That works. Isn't one thing we missed about Vance that I did pick up in my sleepless haze? He was admonished by both the Auschwitz Memorial and the Pope on the same day.
Well done.
That's when you know you're really kicking ass, where you gotta coming and going from the Auschwitz Memorial and the Pope, especially as a Catholic, which he is.
It would be so easy to jab back at him for anything. Like if I was ever in a room and he criticized me, I'd just be like, "You're wearing makeup. You're wearing eyeliner.
You wore makeup that time, and you look just like him. It was great.
You're wearing eyeliner in a professional meeting."
Hard to take
all.
the man serious. I don't understand why Walls didn't whack him with that one during the debate, but, you know, another timeline.
Yeah. All right, that's it for us this week. Welcome back, Ian. Thanks for showing back up.
You're welcome. I'm not sure if I can do this again next week. We'll find out. The Get More Smarter podcast is a production of ColoradoPulse.com and the Bighorn Company. Your hosts are me, Ian Silverii, and America's dad,
Jason Bane,
who managed to figure out how to engineer and produce this thing. I normally make the video version, but Megan's been doing it. Thanks to Megan and Christy for filling in for me while I was gone, by the way. Man, you guys are great at this stuff. The two of them do a lot to support the show, and we're really grateful. Breakmaster Cylinder made the theme songs. This used to be a joke, but now it's not. Get your fucking shots while you still can, because they're going to take them off the shelves. If you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or a comment on Spotify or reply to a post on Blue Sky, email, text us, whatever, we'll read it on air. I haven't been looking, so maybe there's one in there. I'm sure there's a couple, but thank you guys for listening so much. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you got more smarter, it actually helps us a lot. Find us at getmoresmarter.com, where you can sign up for bonus content in our Substack, which I will probably start writing at some point again here. And please send all your angry and non-angry rants to angryrants at getmoresmarter.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to our guest, Joe Neguse. Go fight, win, everybody. We'll see you next time, or the time after that, or maybe the time after that. Let me try.
It'll be
or
a
maybe
time.
even the time after that.